Okay. All right, so we're jumping into chapter 2 tonight. That's going to be starting on page 51. And we're kind of moving now. The first chapter and the introduction was kind of describing the water, if you will. You know, that great line from, what was the movie, As Good as It Gets? I'm drowning here and you're describing the water. Well, we're describing the water. That's what he was basically doing. What is this thing, contemplation, that we're trying to swim in? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it about? What is it and what is it not? So all of those issues, you know, really going through trying to give us a good description of contemplative practice. Chapter 2 is going to be telling us more about how to swim. Okay, so this is going to be more of the actual practice and going forward. So it's kind of a good 1-2 punch, you know, what about the water and then how do we swim in it? Before we dive in to growing up and waking up, was there anything left over from last week that you all wanted to lead off with? Anything that we kind of left undeveloped? Anything that you've been thinking about? Anything there at all? All right, then. I'm going to take that as if I did a great job last week and tied everything off perfectly. How's that? Okay, Danielle's nodding and Tanya's applauding, so good. All right, page 51, growing up and waking up. Sounds like the beginning of a jingle of some sort, growing up and waking. Oh, that was waking up to coffee in the morning. I can almost hear the jingle in my mind right now. He starts off with a little poem. So let's try something, even now. Even as you tend these lines, attend for a moment to your breath as you draw it in. Regard the breath's cool descent, a stream from mouth to throat to the furnace of the heart. Observe that queer, cool confluence of breath and blood, and do your thinking there. So that's from Scott Cairns, Adventures in the New Testament Greek. Turning the page, 2 levels of enlightenment. I'm going to go ahead and read through this and we'll come back. With the new science and language of psychology, and with so many new possibilities for growth and human development, it is common among believers to conflate and confuse growing up with waking up. These two phenomena can overlap considerably, but it is crucially important to distinguish the two, or you will not grasp either one. Growing up has to do with basic education, psychological and emotional maturity, a healthy contact with reality, and enough freedom from your own egocentricity to be sociable and caring. Waking up refers to a much deeper enlightenment and can never be confused with merely being educated or not. When you wake up, you begin to overcome your separateness. You begin to know that you do not look out at God over there, but you look out from God. Or as Paul describes it, I live no longer, not I. You wake up when your protective ego boundaries begin to dissolve and lessen. Awakened people see things in wholes because they look out from wholeness. I know awakened people who still carry much human baggage, and I know psychologically mature people who are almost entirely self-referential and see everything from that limited frame. How rare to meet people who are both grown up and awake. That would be both wholeness and holiness. Okay. So I think even in that first little section, we can start to feel the difference in the approach of these 2 chapters. You know, this one is already pointing toward movement, pointing toward how we move forward rather than just continuing to describe things. Any first impressions? Any thoughts? Did the poem do anything for you?
So when we do this contemplation, and I've done it before, where it's the breathing, I close my eyes, and there's that gong with that You know that singing bowl, and I've done it at night. I fall asleep. So can we do other contemplation? It'll be as good. Like I listen to music, I read poetry, like
Okay,
that.
so I'm having trouble hearing you. Would you say that one more time for my benefit?
So okay, so this is the poem breathing, doing contemplation, concentrating on your breathing, relaxing your muscles. So I've done contemplation like that. And I do it before I sleep, after work and so on. And I fall asleep until I hear that gong again, you know, that Buddhist that thing, that bowl.
Mhm.
And I wake up and oh, I was asleep. I was so relaxed. So I don't know, is that good or bad? Second, there's other ways of contemplation. Like I'm listening to honey, and I'm listening to music or just taking my hike and walking. But that's also another form of contemplation. It's as good. Not that I know you're gonna say dualistic thinking and I'm comparing one or the other, but they're relaxing as well.
Okay, so first of all, what posture do you take when you're trying to do a sit of centering prayer or meditation?
Oh, I'm supine on my back.
Okay, that's your first problem. Yeah.
Ah,
If you're going to try to, because you're guaranteed to fall asleep, you don't even want to rest your head on anything. So if you're going to be doing a meditational sit or contemplation, sit upright. You know, you can sit in a cross-legged position, lotus, half lotus if you want to, or just feet flat on the floor, but sit straight up with the chair back is possible, but not with a headrest. As soon as you rest your head, as soon as you're laying down, then yeah, you're pretty much going to fall asleep. Something about just keeping the body in an erect position and the muscles that need to hold your core muscles or whatever that need to hold you in place also keeps you more alert and more and awake as you're going through this because yes, you are relaxing. So that would be a first thing to try to see if that helps you to stay awake. And yes, there are walking meditations, and you can move into a contemplative state doing a lot of things that are repetitious. You know, you can do it while you're saying the rosary. You can do it, you know, while you're doing other repetitive tasks. And if you have trouble sitting, you know, for 20 to 30 minutes, which is kind of the target range that you want for centering prayer, then it would be good to go to a walking meditation or one of these other things, or even put on earbuds and listen to environmental sounds in the background. Maybe that can help, wind or rain or something like that, or maybe even music that doesn't have, it's not Western music, but something that's a real, you know, just static bed of sound rather than tension and release highs and lows that would draw attention to itself. And you can use those kind of like training wheels on a bike to help you. When you get better at that, then try to back off. If you're using headphones, take out the sound, try to do it in silence, and then take out the motion and keep pulling back. Because eventually it would be great if you can just sit still in silence for 20 to 30 minutes and A, not drive yourself crazy, B, not fall asleep, but stay in that middle zone where you're hyper aware and alert, but you're completely relaxed. You know, your mind has gone down into the alpha state and you really are completely present and you're stepped away from your thoughts, using the sacred word only when necessary or following your breath, depending on what you do. So yeah, so try that, Ellen. Maybe just try sitting up next time, see how that works for you. If it still is a problem, then yeah, add in some motion and see how that works for you. That helpful? Okay. So basically this poem is kind of describing, you know, the process. Let's try something new, even now, even as you tend these lines. So even as we're here, you can still be aware of the breath. That would come into more of the realm of mindfulness training rather than centering prayer or meditation, because we are processing cognitively. But even now, as we're reading these lines, you know, also watch your breath, be aware of your breath. As you draw it in, feel it going all the way down and then coming back out again. If you're doing Vipassana meditation, then you're going to be aware of the breath right here on your lip. As you inhale with mouth closed, you're going to feel the coolness of the breath going in, and then you can also feel it going all the way down, and then coming back out, you're going to feel the warmth on your upper lip. So it's that alternation of cool and warm that you're really focused on so that you're not going to be following the drift of your thoughts and the distractions of whatever else may be around. And you can keep coming back to that awareness of cool and warm, cool and warm. You don't try to direct your breathing, just let it be exactly what it is, but just follow that pattern of cool and warm. It functions just like the sacred word does. I like the sacred word because it's more intermittent and it gives you periods of real complete stillness and silence and not having to focus. But whatever works for you is great. But this is what he's talking about. The breath's cool descent, the stream from mouth to throat to the furnace of the heart. Observe that queer, cool confluence of breath and blood and do your thinking there, which means not to think at all, right? I mean, that's the idea. You're not putting things into words. As soon as you put things into words, you've entered back into the egoic realm. We want to stay out of that realm for these purposes and just see what pure presence feels like when we're not thinking about it. Intensely aware, but not thinking about it. All right. Now he's going to talk about these. But any comments on any of that before I forge ahead here? Okay, 2 levels of enlightenment. And this is, I think, a good distinction for us to make. With a new science and language of psychology, and with so many new possibilities for growth and human development, it is common among believers to conflate and confuse growing up with waking up. Okay, conflate and confuse. You know what the two mean? Conflate means to put something together as if it's the same thing. And then confuse obviously means to confuse the two. So often what we would do is waking up and growing up, we would see as the same thing, conflate them, or simply confuse the two. And what he wants to do is make it crystal clear that these two phenomena can overlap, but it's crucially important to distinguish what they are, or you won't grasp either one. So growing up has to do with basic education, psychological and emotional maturity, a healthy contact with reality, and enough freedom from your own egocentricity to be sociable and caring. That makes sense to you? All right. We just want to get to the place of basic emotional regulation. We want to get to the water line, in other words. That's really what we want to do. One of the things that we have made clear at the effect is when we bring new people in and we're working with them, we're trying to assess where they are in terms of that water line. If they're really below water, if they're, first of all, of course, if they're in the throes of addiction, alcoholism, or whatever, and they're not really able to process in real time, then they're way below that water line. What we want to do is use clinical methods and help them to get up to that place of balance, that place of emotional regulation and ability to be present. Because from there, that's the foundation that they need to be able then to go into spiritual formation and go where they need to go. But we need to have that foundation set. Otherwise, the rest of the stuff isn't going to work, if they're really struggling, at that deeper level. So growing up has to do with getting to that place, at least of equanimity. Sometimes I talk about it as a 51%, right? You cross the threshold into 51%. So more often than not, you're able to be present, make your decisions based on what's right in front of you. It doesn't mean that your stone is smooth. It doesn't mean that you're still not having unresolved things that you're processing, but you're able, at least most of the time, to make that decision. And now he's going to contrast that with waking up, which refers to a much deeper enlightenment and can never be confused with merely being educated or not. When you wake up, you begin to overcome your separateness. You begin to know that you do not look out at God over there, but you look out from God. Or as Paul describes it, I live no longer, not I. You wake up when your protective ego boundaries begin to dissolve and lessen. This is basically saying the same thing that Jesus says when he says that you're not going to find the kingdom out there, right?
Yeah.
By observation, same thing he's telling us. It's not going to be like, oh, look, here it is, there it is. All of his followers, when is the kingdom going to come? What are the signs? How are we going to know? And he says, you're not going to see it by observation. It's not out there. It's within. And so he's saying this in different words, but the same thing. You don't look out at God over there, but you look out from God. And so this is, now I think we've established by now that Richard Rohr is pretty much a panentheist, right? And we talked about that. Theism understands God as being separate from creation, but connected to it, communicating with it, but separate from. Pantheism, God and the universe, all creation, are one and the same. They're conflated, basically. So the universe is kind of God's body, if you will. So that tree over there is actually God. You could pray to it. You could hug it. Panentheism is a midpoint between the two, where God is not the same as the universe, but God is immanent in the universe. God is infused in the universe. So that's the kind of theological place or cosmological worldview that Richard Rohr has. And so this idea of looking out from God is pretty natural to him from that respect, because God is in us and infused in us. But that's basically the same thing that Jesus is saying. If we understand kingdom as the complete presence, the quality of life of complete presence, of the awareness of oneness and unity in all of our daily moments, then yes, God is within. And so we're not looking at God as separate from, a lot of times people refer to the big guy upstairs, when they're talking about God, or we look up when we're thinking about God. But the truth of the matter is that God couldn't be any closer than our next heartbeat or our next breath, because God is right here, right now, always. It's a whole different way of understanding our relationship with God.
What was that? Entheism?
Say again?
What you said, it's entheism? I'm trying to look it up.
Oh, pantheism,
Right.
Pantheism.
You said something after that.
Panentheism. So
How do you spell that?
add an en there, Panentheism. Panentheism.
And okay.
Yeah. So there's theism, pantheism, and then in between the two is panentheism. And there's a whole bunch more, but those are the three we're interested in right now. Okay. Panentheism.
Okay.
Now, for any of you, does this present any sort of problem? Is it jarring in any way to think of God within as opposed to up there, out there, somewhere else?
I think I think it's beautiful. And it, having read more of Richard Rohr, I can it makes sense. But when I first read that we would look out from God, it kind of threw me, because probably because innately I think, well, God would look in. So if we were to look from God, we would look in, not out. And then I considered maybe that suggests, like there's like this almost understanding of like, because everything is all within, like it is kind of in that pantheistic sort of viewpoint, there is nowhere else to go except for to expand. So like there's this wholeness, but it's still growing at the same time. So like to be grown up, that's different than growing up. So it's not like, the perfection is in the unity, right? Not like the ego perfect. So there's this sense of like expansion constantly, like growing, as in like the verb growing up and waking up. I don't know. That's kind of where I went with that.
Okay. Yeah, it's not so clear cut, is it? And even trying to describe this is difficult. I always love Danielle trying to describe whatever she was trying to describe that one time. Did we just lose her? Oh no, there she is down there. But she finally had to start talking about isms, because the words were just failing her. I remember it was just a classic exercise in trying to express the inexpressible. And we're getting really close to that, trying to express something that is so hard to express. But this is a really big deal in terms of the way we look at our relationship with God, the way we look at our relationship with anything else. Remember when we spent a lot of time talking about I-thou relationships, remember? And Carl Jasper's I-thou and I-it relationships. And the I-thou would be like subject to subject, total connection, as opposed to I-it, subject to object, where we're looking at something as if it's a painting in a frame on the wall, and we're looking at it, as opposed to like sticking our head inside the painting and actually being a part of it. Or maybe the difference between riding a motorcycle and riding a car. You know, when you're on a motorcycle, you're really a part of the road. Or you're on a bicycle, you're really a part of the road. And when you're in a car, you're watching it slide past your windshield and all your windows. And it's a very different experience. And that's the kind of difference that we're trying to get here. As long as we look at God as an object out there, up there, somewhere other than where I am, then we always have the ability to feel abandoned, to feel separate from. There is not a moment we breathe that we are separate from God, except in our own minds. That is the only place where we can even conceive of such a thing. And of course, it's an illusion. We are never separate from God. And that's why it's so important, I think, to make the distinction he's trying to make here. Whether we actually call it growing up and waking up, those are just labels. It doesn't matter. But the conception of where you see God in relation to yourself is huge.
I think growing up, Dave, maybe all religions, I don't know, but I grew up with God being up in the clouds and always looking up and upward, and he was separate from us. But I think, as an adult, as we wake up, right, we see differently, and it's very clear to me what you're saying. The difference is clear.
Good.
And I really loved your analogy, because I used to ride a motorcycle, of just how immersive and kind of one with all of your surroundings you are. It is such a special experience, and one that is kind of indescribable. I still don't express it well, but I just really love that you use that analogy, because that like really, really caught me up. So thank you.
Trying to picture you on a motorcycle there, Tanya.
Oh my gosh, she was a beautiful cherry red cruiser. Loved her dearly.
That's great.
Tanya,
Yeah.
there's a saying about motorcycles that says, four wheels moves your body and two wheels move your soul.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Yes.
Well,
I
I knew that Scott and Randy are motorcycle riders. I didn't know you were. I'm sorry, finish your thought, Tanya. I cut you off.
Oh, years ago when I was just starting out in broadcasting, I got to do an audio book. It was a project I was hired for to read on cassette tape. That's how old this is. A book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
I remember that title. Never read the book.
Where were you when I needed you?
I think Rohr kind of takes this from Buddhist teaching, because their concept is to awaken is to learn the art of living, right? And to master the mind, kind of bring it back to the reality of, present moment, or to unite the mind, body and reality. So I kind of think Rohr might have taken his statement somewhat from the Buddhist teachings of what awakening is, or awaken.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tony. It's there, but he didn't have to go to Buddhist tradition to get the idea, because it's right there in Christian tradition as well, but Christian contemplative and mystical tradition, and not what we typically think of Christianity now. The idea of waking up, Jesus telling the disciples, the three disciples, to stay awake with him, stay awake at Gethsemane, remember? Stay awake, and they can't do it. And but every mystical tradition has the same idea. I read a poem by Rumi, was that last Sunday or the Sunday before? The Great Wagon. You've all heard, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. It's that famous, the famous line comes from this poem. But at the very end of it, he keeps saying, "Don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep." He says it 3 times. So that idea of waking up to this oneness, this unity, this everythingness is so huge in pretty much all the responsible traditions. And so, yeah, but Tony's absolutely right. It's really explicit in Buddhism, much more than it is in Christian tradition or Jewish tradition, but it's still there. But in Buddhist tradition, the awakened one, that's what Buddha means. It means the awakened one. And so that's right on the tip of the tongue there.
There's an interesting metaphor in neurology, and that is process of encoding when we have an experience. So you have an experience, and the process of encoding is assigning your existing understanding of words to your experience. Well, what happens then when you have no words for your experience? It's totally different. That you can't grasp that. The neurological processes can't do anything with it. You just know. You just have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that usually is something that happens when you're awake or in the process of waking up.
I had our chaplain cohort met yesterday by Zoom as well. And every meeting once a week, we read someone's case study. So they present a case study and we read through it and then we discuss it afterwards. And this one chaplain, who is a hospice chaplain, had gone out to a home with a social worker of a very poor family in Western Kentucky. And he said, just imagine Appalachian style poverty, right? It's a trailer home with just three rooms and it was really dilapidated. But he had the most intense experience there because the matriarch was dying. She had lung cancer and she would be dead within probably 14 days, if not sooner. But her daughter was there and her three children who were early 20s and late teens, but they were all autistic. And so they had the cognition and the emotional maturity of probably, from the verbatim, I'd say probably 7 or 8 year olds at the most. And they were processing on that level. But the experience that he had with these children were so intense. At one point, he just says in parentheses, he said, I had nothing to say, so I kept my mouth shut. And it's kind of like what you're talking about, Brady. There were no, he's trying to help these children to grieve and to prepare themselves for the grief of losing their grandmother, their Mima, as they called her. But at this one point, he was so moved himself and drawn into the experience that there were no words. And so he wisely just said nothing and just was part of the process. And I think that's where we get to in these kind of contemplative and even mystical encounters. We get to a place where we are experiencing the inexpressible. There are no words for these. We can't encode them. Now we're going to try, especially after the fact, we're going to try to assign meaning, and all the books and the writings of the mystics, they try, but usually they're pretty incomprehensible. They just sound a lot like gobbledygook until you've had the experience yourself. And then you can relate to what they're talking about because you know the feeling. You don't have any better words than they did, but you know the feeling. And so the words can re-evoke that. And so we keep trying, we keep trying to use words as pointers to an experience that we need to have. It's kind of like the movie Contact that we've been talking about and we're talking about on Sunday. She has an experience. She can't understand it. She can't express it. But everything in her as a human being knows that it was real. She can't refute it. She can't dismiss it, even with all her scientific knowledge. That's what we're talking about. Everything that Jesus is trying to teach us is trying to funnel us toward having that experience. Because until we do, we may be all grown up, but we're not woke up, right? We're not awakened because we have to have that experience that takes us into a whole different sort of realm, whole different kind of dimension, if you will.
Dave, in the past, we've talked about to get there where we're awakened comes through great love or great suffering. Is that still at play in kind of what we're talking about here? Does that?
Well, it's kind of like the alcoholic can hit bottom or bring bottom up to hit them. Have you heard that expression before? So what that's talking about is that if an alcoholic or an addict continues on their path, they're eventually going to hit bottom and a series of bottoms, because they're basically going to burn through all their relationships. They're going to burn through everything, and they will keep hitting bottom eventually. And the hope is that one bottom will be deep enough and conclusive enough that they will finally make the decision that they want to live differently, and then change becomes possible. You know, the pain is great enough that change becomes possible. But there's a kinder and gentler way, and that's to bring the bottom up to you. And that would be starting to do some of the work that we're talking about, so that you don't have to go to the point where you really hit that catastrophic bottom, but you can kind of bring up that level of awareness to a place where you can do the same kind of work without having to run to the catastrophic. And so we're basically doing the same kind of thing here in contemplative practice. You know, everybody's afraid of dying. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? And so we're afraid of this, and we're running toward this. But if we can start practicing the little death of contemplation, that we're in a sense bringing the bottom up to us, we can start to experience the actual sensation of stepping outside of your egoic consciousness and feel what that feels like, and realize that there's still something there. I mean, that's the big dread, right? The terror is that when the ego stops functioning, that there's nothing else there. You know, this is it. This is all there is. And to find out that we can survive that, to find out that there is something else there, well, that makes all the difference. And so if we can do that in an intentional and conscious way, and continue to practice that, that's a way to do it without having to have a near-death experience or whatever that it may take to achieve the same thing.
Thank you.
Dave, I love what you said about that God is infused in us. And yet I know that I've been a little nervous at times when I've heard language that says, you know, that the Spirit is in us. And I don't know if it's just some leftover baggage from my Catholic stuff. But I get, it almost feels a little, I don't know if heretical is the right word, or blasphemous, that I'm almost like raising myself up to God's level, and that's about the best thing I can use to describe it. I mean, my meditational practices, I have had really wonderful waking up experiences. But I also don't want to go to, that inflated place of, feeling like that means that I'm equal to God. I mean, does that make any sense?
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's perfect. And someplace we really needed to go. I always remember, I forget if it was a movie or it was something where Shirley MacLaine was running up and down the beach screaming, "I am God, I am God, I am God."
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you saw that, but it was, I don't know that she meant what it sounds like she meant. She may be saying exactly the same thing that we're trying to say, but in the moment, it came out the way it came out. The irony is that when we can really touch the Spirit within, God as infused in us, it's not an inflation. It is the realization of the profoundest humility. It goes in the opposite direction, because we realize as we are one with God, we're at the same time realizing our complete dependence, our complete vulnerability, and the humility of just right-sizing our understanding of our relationship with God and with everyone else and with ourselves. It is not an inflating thing, it's a deflating thing. In fact, the only way that this is going to happen is when we descend into that place. It is the kenosis It is the self-emptying of everything. The ego would inflate us. It's only when we step away from all of that that we can actually experience what we're talking about. And so it's a falling into, it's a relinquishment that takes us where we're going here, and not the opposite. And so it's going to be experienced in a completely different way. And if it's not, then yeah, we're still wholly inside the ego.
Yeah.
And
That helps a lot.
I hope so. I mean, at least what I hope it helps is to take away any of your misgivings about this process or this language or this way of approaching our relationship with God. You know, Genesis tells us that, you know, God formed Adam out of the, you know, the clay, the dust of the earth, but he breathes into his nostrils his own life. And so that's a really good image for us to understand, that breathed into us. And the only thing that keeps us moving, you know, that keeps us alive is that breath of God. It is that life of God within us that is the spark of life. And so some of those images, you know, from Genesis and other places can give us maybe a little bit more graphic understanding of what's going on here. Because the worst thing that we can do to ourselves is imagine God as wholly outside, other than, someplace else, you know, miles and eons and dimensions away, and we're trying to shout into the dark to get some kind of connection. And when the truth of the matter is, he's within. You know, the kingdom is within. And the word that in the Greek that is used there, entos, you know, means within, among, and in the midst of, all at the same time. It's a Swiss Army knife preposition. You know, it does all those things at the same time. And he's trying to get that sense of immanence and closeness and connection that is always here. It's such a different way of looking at the nature and the presence of God. But this is what contemplation is all about.
That's good.
Yeah,
That
I'm thinking about Judy's comment there and thinking about Christ saying, you know, look at me and you see God, or you see, I forgot exactly how he said that. And how that can be, like when I'm saying that, like there could be a lot of ego in there and a lot of narcissism and a lot of, you know, self-aggrandizing going on, even though I like this take that Rohr is exploring here of, you know, getting to the point where I can see God in everyone that I interact with and reflect God.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, William, because here is Jesus saying, yeah, you don't need to see the Father, you see me. He tells Philip, right? Show us the Father. You don't need to see the Father, Philip. How long you been with me? You still don't get it. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. This is what the Father looks like in human form. At the same time, and in you know, in the next breath, Jesus is saying, but I don't do anything on my own initiative. I only do what the Father does through me. I mean, Jesus is at once seems to be expanding and contracting at the same time. You know, this is what the Father looks like, but what the Father looks like is complete servanthood. I just finished washing your feet, for crying out loud. You know, this is what the Father looks like, right? What the Father looks like is unassuming. What the Father looks like is decent. What the Father looks like is self-effacing. It's all of these things. And that's the way Jesus has lived his whole life. And he's saying, if you've seen that, that's what the Father is. The Father isn't what you imagine him to be up at the top of the hierarchical pyramid, you know, running the show. He's right here with you. He is serving you, you know. That's such a different view. And so, yes, it may sound like it's aggrandizing, but really it's self-effacing. But it's no less true.
It's interesting. In my head, I hear it so differently. I don't hear Jesus saying, "Look at me."
Right.
I can imagine instead him saying something like, "Look at me." Like, look at that. People watch me, follow me. But yeah, the kind of emphasis on look, see me.
And Jesus is always pointing to the Father, always pointing through himself to the Father. You know, you want to see the Father, you've seen the kind of love that I have for you. You've seen the way I operate. But it's not done in a prideful way. And I think he shows us that by all the serial comments he makes that take us into all these different places at the same time.
I have like for most of us, actually, yeah, we see God as separate from us. He's out there, he's gonna come help me, he's gonna tell me how to do things or teach me. Okay. The other thing is when you say God is within us or within me, I go to two different levels of thinking of this. Within me, he's in my brain rattling around telling me, or he's in my heart telling me things, or he's influencing me. But still, I see that as a separate entity. It just so happens to be inside of me. But it's still a separate entity until you use the word infused, meaning he's part of me. He's part of my molecules. He's part of me. It's very, very different from he's inside of me, living in my heart or living in my brain. Because to me, living in my heart or brain is still a separateness.
Yeah, we got to make sure that God doesn't come out like a tumor or a parasite.
Right. Exactly. That was the picture of it. Right. But until it's infused in me,
yeah,
then we are one.
Much better infused.
Right.
That idea of, I mean, that's why communion is so graphic. You know, you actually eat God, you eat the flesh and you drink the blood. And then what does that do? That assimilates into your very cells. I mean, that's the idea of this complete infusion, assimilation, if you will, you know, but that's what Jesus is after in using such a stark image.
So, okay, so this is my second or third thought, is that God is inside all of us. Every creature I meet, every person I meet, even the ones I dislike. That is difficult.
And not only the ones you dislike, but the ones that you have a complete, absolute abhorrence and disgust for. God is just as much infused in them as he is in whoever you hold in highest esteem or yourself. And this is what loving the enemy is all about. And this is what Jesus is trying to get across. God does not make such distinctions. Every single one of us is infused equally, is one with God equally. But it's how ensconced we are in our egos that makes the difference as to whether we'll ever experience that and how much harm we're going to do to each other. But it makes no never mind to God's love, only our ability to experience and then show the effect of that love in our lives, actions, and so on and so forth, choices.
And in that circumstance, we might look at that kind of a person and say, are they not really awakened on their own yet? Maybe they're not there yet. And so then we lean back and just say what Jesus said, forgive them, they know not what they do, or they just don't know any better, or they don't know what they don't know yet, because they haven't maybe awakened. That's probably the closest.
Not only not awakened, but not grown up yet either, right?
Not grown up. Some of them are not grown up or awakened.
Exactly. They're still underwater. They still are, you know, the unconscious is running the show and they don't even know it. That's what Jesus means. They don't know what they're doing. They're not aware. To them, internally, it's justified. It makes sense. But it's disaster to everyone around them.
But aren't we making a judgment at that point?
No, we're discerning. We're
What?
discerning at that point, Tony.
Didn't sound like it. Yeah.
Well, if someone just blew up your living room, then you can say, hey, that was not good. But that's not because I'm judging a person against a standard that I have set previously. It's because I just experienced the explosion.
Yeah, I agree. I was just trying to make that, maybe trying in my own mind to make a better clarification of that.
But that's good, Tony. Just that's a distinction that we've been really pounding away at, the distinction between judgment and discernment. You know, Jesus says, don't judge, don't hold not only people, but even your moments to standards in your head, because then you're never present. Everything is always an object that's either meeting or not meeting your expectations. So you're never really present. Discernment is a conclusion we reach based on the experience, which means we had to be close enough, long enough to actually know something about the person, place, or thing to be able to reach some sort of conclusion. And that's a very different thing. We have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's read this last paragraph, because it's got a good point as well. Awakened people see things in wholes because they look out from wholeness. Okay, they're looking out from the oneness and the unity and the wholeness of God, right? But he says, I know awakened people who still carry much human baggage. And I know psychologically mature people who are almost entirely self-referential and see everything from that limited frame. And so, the question becomes, well, how can a person be awake? How can they have had this experience, this encounter that allows them to have seen the wholeness and the connection of everything and to be looking out from that wholeness and still have emotional baggage, still have unresolved issues that weigh them down, that they're still not healed from the trauma of their life's experience? It seems so counterintuitive. It's easier, I think, to see the person who's grown up who is still self-referential. That seems a little easier to understand. They're grown up, but they're not yet awakened. But this person who's awake and still has baggage. But then I thought of Mother Teresa. She's someone that we would certainly say was awakened spiritually. And yet what she revealed, or what was revealed after her death for her, in those letters that she wrote to her confessor, showed that there was still intense, pain there, and intense longing or feeling that there was something wrong with her, because early in her life, she had an absolute, peak experience, mystical experience that drove her to do what she did for the next 60 years. But that didn't repeat. She didn't continue to have those kind of peak, ecstatic experiences in her life, and she longed for them. And so I think we can see that, yeah, there is still the possibility that even if we're awakened and we're living according to that experience and that awareness of wholeness and connection, but we can still have things down in the basement that are causing us pain. What she didn't do was act on them, and that made all the difference. But there is this possibility of having one and not the other. You would think by the time you're awakened, everything else is healed and everything else is perfectly balanced, but that is not necessarily the case. And then people who are psychologically mature, but they're still self-referential. They're still operating totally within the ego, even though they are emotionally regulated. They are aware enough to be able to play in the sandbox well with each other, and be decent and care about each other. But they're still operating completely here. So many religious people are still operating here. Salvation is all about them getting to heaven, rather than understanding that salvation is this infusion into the whole right now, not sometime later after death, but right now. And so, yeah, we can easily have one without the other, but we're obviously shooting for the whole ball of wax.
Can it be too that each of these processes, even waking up, is a journey, and that we encounter in stages, and the healing that comes in those stages? Aren't we probably trying to continue to awaken our whole life long? You think?
Totally agree with that, Judy. That's why I keep saying, my stone not yet smooth.
Yeah.
I've had certain experiences that have convinced me of certain things. I try to live my life on those. But, it seems like there's always another corner that I'm turning. There's always another vista that's presenting. There's always another layer of the onion to peel off. And I feel that happening. At this stage in my life, there's a whole new raft of things that I'm dealing with, that I just weren't even on my radar screen 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but suddenly at my age, yeah, they're right there, you know, and I got to deal with them, and I'm working on them, you know, and so yeah, it's a constant process, and I don't know that the stone in this life is ever completely smooth, but that doesn't really matter, you know. It's that 51% plus that matters. Can we get to that place where we have really changed our mailing address over to the light? And even though we take trips to the dark side, we don't live there anymore. And it's a completely different thing. And usually in your moments, you know, you can bring yourself back to presence and awareness enough that the tail is not wagging the dog, and you can make your choice based on what's really right in front of you and what love requires in that moment.
That's why we need that good cup of coffee in the morning to wake up.
Oh, you just reminded me of the jingle. The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. That's what I was.
That's right.
That's right. There you go.
I really like Brady's thought earlier about this idea of new thoughts not being connected to words. Is that what you said? Like the instant it's connected to words, it's
Yeah, I mean, if it's so probably everything that so I'm thinking about the ego uses words. Words are heavy. The ego uses words to exercise control, exercise power, exercise a sense of its own autonomy. But I'm talking about those experiences for which there are no words. You can't encode them. There's a term called bounded rationality. You can only understand what you already understood. And so here's something new, and it's an experience for which there are no words, and you can't encode it. You just have this experience. And you can hold it in your memory as best you can, but even there's a tendency for it to begin to fade. And you try, like I have with the death experience, like Patricia has, like he has, to try and articulate some of those kinds of experiences. But the person who knows best what's going on is the person who's trying, because you're constantly frustrated because it's like that's not it. That file in my filing cabinet doesn't exist for this experience. There's no place.
And that doesn't mean that later on you won't have a filing cabinet for that experience.
Yeah,
you don't at this moment.
Correct.
And that's the important thing. And so you just kind of have to let it be. You know, you just file it away, and because there are no words, right? I'm sorry, Ellen, what were you going to say, dear?
Oh, I was going to say that's why we have poets, and yet also their words are limited to our human words. Because I was reading Emily Dickinson last night, and it struck me. She says, it is the very end of this. I forgot the title of the poem, but it says, "Parting is all we know of heaven and all we need of hell." I said, oh my gosh, that is so profound. So I have to go to the analysis and see. And yeah, she can put it in 8 words, what will deep meaning. And yet all of us will have different interpretations of it. It's just beautiful. I love Emily Dickinson.
I shared with this group, and I think it was before some of us were here some time ago, about this experience and interaction I had with this artist years ago. And one of the points that he was making is, like, for instance, in a poem, you read a poem and sometimes it just speaks to you, it just grabs you. And what he was saying is that experience you're having, you cannot find it in the words. They're there. It's somehow woven into the words, but you cannot find it in the words. There's a sentiment that's being expressed.
That's good.
The same with a song, some music, same with a painting. There's that you can't describe and you can't find, but it's real.
Well, can I take it back to contact and Jodie Foster's character, Ellie Arroway, is floating, looking out, and she says, no words, no words. They should have sent a poet, but even a poet probably could not be able to express what they would be seeing were they in her situation.
Mhm. Certainly not at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Now, in reflection, the poet is going to do a better job at evoking the kind of experience that Brady is talking about, or re-evoking it in a reader or a listener, than the empiricist, you know. But yeah, in that moment, there are no words. And in fact, if you're really in the moment, you're not even thinking in words. It's just pure presence. There are no words. You're not thinking in words. You're not thinking at all. And that's the contemplative experience that we're talking about and trying to achieve on a repeated and regular basis. We want to keep going there because that's what is slowly convincing us, you know, that there is more to us than just this ego that talks to us in words, that there is something more, and something that survives. Because that changes the whole calculus in terms of human experience. Changes whether we can enjoy the ride of our lives or not, right? All right. Good. I was thinking, you know, in this second chapter, it seemed like, we might be able to get through 2 of these in an evening. Yeah, no, silly wabbit.
Really?
Yeah. No way. You guys are good. You bring out all the good stuff.
Oh, man.
Well, let's wrap it up. And there you are, Scott. Go ahead.
Father God, thank you for this experience, this moment, this thickening of our reality, and our ability to touch the hem of your garment, so to speak. We go on these journeys to discover life itself. And we encounter you and we look for life. And that life is abundant and beautiful. It's what we do with it that messes it up all the time. So I hope that and pray that as we invest our time in sharing these things with each other and exploring what others have left behind for us, that we are able to connect with each other and you at a very pure level. We're grateful, Father, for all that you do for us. So we give our thanks and we pray and we share our names in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thanks again, everybody.
Okay.
Another good discussion. See ya Sunday.
All right. Night, night.
Have a good week, everybody.
Yeah.
Good night, good night, good night. Jordana, Scott,
Good night.
Vaughn,
Good night.
if you're there, Vaughn. All right. Marion, Marion,
Nami.
you're not going to be sick, right? We're going to see you Sunday.
Hopefully not.
Okay, great. All right, dear. See you soon.
See ya.